Welcome, everyone, to the 47th uh, Women's Association of Hilton Head 2026 Conversation with an Author. My name is Janet Porter, for those of you who haven't joined us before. And what we're celebrating this year is that we have had 47 webinars. And by the end of the year, Bobby has got us booked for the year. And by the end of the year, we will have done over 50, which was never thought possible when we first started these after COVID. So that's terrific. We are so excited to have as our guest today the author Laura Elizabeth. Laura is going to be discussing her book called All Is Now Lost. She is actually writing a series of books called The Island Mysteries, and we'll be discussing the first of that series with her. Bobby's going to explain later and show you about her subsequent books, but we wanted to start with her first books because I always like to read books that are in a series, in order. Her books are all set in the Low Country on a mythical island, and she and I are going to talk about that in just a minute. So if this is your first Zoom webinar, I just want to explain that you can hear and see us, but we cannot hear or see you because you're the audience. But we do want to hear from you. So how does that work? Well, if you move your cursor to the bottom of the page, or on some devices, it's the top of the page, there's a toolbar. And staying with that toolbar, you'll notice that there's an icon that says Q&A, which stands for questions and answers. So you can write your questions in, and we'll be monitoring that. And you can also chat in if you want. We do need your help also, I want to mention, to continue to do our webinars. Linda Jackson and Bobby Helbig and I are grateful for anybody who wants to help us out. So being on this team has been really gratifying. That's why I've done it for 6 years. And if you love to read, this would be so fun for you. Please contact me or Bobby if you're interested in joining the team. This is a reminder that we want you to participate by asking lots of questions. The webinars where we actually have the most fun is where there's lots of questions, because those are really our best webinars. So let me introduce Laura Elizabeth to you before she joins us. She lives in Atlanta, but she fell in love with Daufuskie Island many years ago, and I'm going to ask her to talk about that. She tries to spend as much time as possible on Daufuskie. She says she's here about every 4 or 5 weeks. But her books are set on Mongan Island, which is a mythical low country island modeled on Daufuskie that's, of course, in South Carolina. Inspired by Daufuskie, Laura's books often feature local landscapes and community, reflecting her passion for the area and her work as a community activist. She has a background in business, having worked in the insurance, healthcare, and sports marketing industries, and she's led a workshop at Ollie on developing characters and settings to write novels. So, Laura, would you please join us?
Yep, I'm here, but I'm locked out of my video. It says the host has turned off my video.
Okay, I'll add your video.
Perfect.
There you are. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
So thank you for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it. First of all, I always like to ask our authors, where are you?
I'm in Atlanta
You're in
today.
Atlanta.
Yeah, tomorrow
Sure.
DeFus, but today Atlanta.
Let's start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up. You're the second of 13 children or whatever is interesting about your story.
Yeah,
And then we'll get to how you fell in love with Daufuskie.
sure. Not the second of 13 children, but I have made a career out of moving up and down the eastern seacoast. So I was born in New Jersey and have lived in Connecticut, Massachusetts twice, New Jersey twice, Virginia, and now Atlanta, with spending lots of time in South Carolina. So we've moved around for different jobs and different things in our life. I have 2 children. One is here in Atlanta, not far away from us, and the other is in Dallas. And so it's always nice to spend time together on the island or here in Atlanta or wherever we regroup. So it's a little bit about me.
So let's put this in perspective. It's not like you don't have a busy life. You do have children, and you have a full-time corporate job,
Yes,
right?
I do.
And you write books.
And I write books. Yep.
So how do
Yeah.
you do all that?
Um, it is, I'm a good scheduler. I like scheduling. And, you know, as a author, you also are a small business owner. You know, you are responsible for marketing and getting out there and talking to potential readers and learning what readers like and, you know, explaining about the genre that you write in and reaching people to explore new ideas. So, in addition to the writing, you also have to be thinking about distribution channels for your work. So, um, I just compartmentalize a lot. So,
You're excellent at that. So a big part of this book is the setting. And the setting is mythical, but it's based on Defusky. So why don't you tell the group how you got exposed to Defusky and fell in love?
yeah, so actually, the Defusky is the reason I wrote two books in the Island Mystery series. Um, we weren't supposed to be going on the trip to Defusky that brought us there for the very first time. We were supposed to be going to the Grand Canyon, but we had two dogs that my neighbor was going to watch. And a couple of days before our trip, she was no longer able to do that. So we had to kind of scramble around and make alternate plans. One of the dogs was a rescue lab who we felt we could never board because she would feel that she was going to be abandoned again. And so we knew that we would have to travel with her if we were going to travel at all. So I guess it's partly good luck and partly the having a yellow lab that needed to be pampered a little bit, brought on vacation. So we weren't really that familiar with a lot of the islands around Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina. We hadn't lived in Virginia very long, so we just Googled pet friendly places that, you know, probably had availability with such short notice of spring break. And the Melrose Resort, which is Defusky, was at one of the top on the first page. And we asked some of our neighbors and friends. Nobody had ever heard of it, didn't even know if we were saying Defusky right and correctly. But we just decided we call it our YOLO trip. We just said, you only live once. We'll just roll the dice and take the two dogs, the two kids, loaded up the car. And what we thought was going to be an 8.5 hour drive turned into about 11 hours down 95 on spring break. And it was quite the journey where we barely made the ferry at that time. And my son looked at me and said, I feel like we're going to be here, you know, again. And I said, he was 8 years old. And I said, well, yeah, our car's here. We're going to come back. And he said, no, I feel like we're going to come back here again, like a lot more times. And that was the first clue, like something was happening here. There was a little bit of what I call island magic. And we took the ferry, we took the trolley from the ferry to the Melrose Resort. And as we were pulling in, we turned left into the resort. I just was overcome with this feeling that I had finally found my home. And so we had a fabulous trip. We rented a little cottage on the resort property, and it was Easter week, and we had Easter on the island and did all kinds of amazing things, had a fabulous family vacation, and ended up buying property on that trip. That we had just known that that was where we wanted to be. And we subsequently bought another piece of property, and we are now building a home there so that when that's complete, we will live there full time. But in the years that have passed, there's been so many adventures on the island. We've vacationed multiple times a year for weeks on end, renting other people's houses or cottages or places. And through all the things, all the bankruptcies, all the people in jail, all the, you know, wild stories. We've always returned to Defusky year after year, vacation after vacation, and just really built strong family memories, creating your own fun. I'm a person that on vacation, I have to do something every single day. And so at least one organized thing a day. And so we would do scavenger hunts or just endless things. That was such a gift to have the four of us have that family time alone and without the interruptions of the world and all the world seems miles and miles and lifetimes away, even though it's only a 30-minute boat ride when you're on Defusky. And that's part of the reason why I love it so much is that it's just not there. And so um, we always went, we always went on vacation. And during 2020, when you guys were doing WAHHI, I was, my passion project was trying to reinvigorate the Melrose Resort, which went bankrupt shortly after we bought our first piece of property. And I set out on this campaign of cold calling and talking to people all around the world to try and find investors and was doing investor site visits on for the property. Ended up finding people who were interested and an operator, but somebody else came along and bought it before we could get to our offer. But it was an incredible experience talking to people worldwide about Melrose and about all that Melrose could be and should be. And somebody that I connected with, that my husband and I went to college with 1,000 years ago, wrote a book and said, you know, it's not often that people do things confidentially, quietly, without any, you know, being paid just because they feel compelled to do it. I think you should write a book about, you know, this passion project. And I never intended to write a book about a passion project, but through the course of discussion with his publisher, it became, why don't you write a book about with Defusky as the setting, and that's how the series was born. So
So this is a perfect lead in to you describing a little bit about All Is Now Lost, which takes place on Mongan Island, but it's
yes,
modeled on Daufusky.
yes, and so some of the places that I write about, even the cover of the book is actually, this is the road, the main road in the Melrose Resort called the Avenue of Oaks. This is based a picture that my husband took that the artist used to create the book cover. Um, The series is a cozy mystery series. So that means that an amateur sleuth is solving the crime. And we don't get involved in all the forensics or, you know, the blood and the gore and things like that. We use the power of deduction and opportunity. And that's what the protagonist does in the book. She's a former executive who husband has passed away and she starts her life over on the island. And she has already bought property on the island and has a home there. So she's familiar with it, but she really steps forward as an entrepreneur on the island, opening a bookshop, which is PS my dream someday. I'm gonna do that, but because there isn't a bookstore currently on Defusky. So she opens a bookstore that serves tea, and she becomes an entrepreneur and just happens to fall into the mystery of someone dying, and she solves the crime. So it is a cozy mystery where you do have to take that leap of faith that a amateur sleuth who's not, you know, part of the police force who will help solve the crime. But I will say on Defusky, there is no police force. And so Beaufort County does send over a sheriff, but it's on a very regular schedule and everyone kind of knows when that's happening. So the things that I write about the police taking the boat over, and there is a lot of self-regulation on the island. So if you're familiar with it, you know that it isn't impossible that we have a lot of amateur sleuths on Defusky. So
Yeah. So the term cozy mystery, which I've never really heard before. Cozy mystery is a term in literature that really talks about mysteries that are solved by amateurs. Is that right?
Correct. Yes,
I've
that
never heard
is a
that term before.
yeah. So like Agatha Christie is a cozy mystery. Um, Murder She Wrote, cozy mystery. Father Brown is a cozy mystery. So it's an amateur sleuth is the protagonist, but also the crime occurs off scene. So you, as the reader, do not witness the crime, and you do not get involved in like the forensics of the crime. So it occurs someplace and then the crime is announced, so that people hear cozy mystery and they think cozy like you're in your blanket and you the reader are cozy. But what makes it cozy is that it's not a professional. So and for some people they don't like that idea that it's too much of a leap of faith that Jessica Fletcher is going to be riding her bicycle all around Cabot Cove and finding all these mysteries. But um, I kind of like the idea of somebody, a normal, everyday person, being able to solve the crime, because if you're paying attention, you can piece together the things that have happened. Like a lot of times, things are in plain sight and we just don't see them. So I think it's an homage to what we can do versus the impossible of what can't be done.
Well, the only problem I had with Jessica was that Cabot Cove seemed to have the highest murder rate in the entire
No,
world. I mean,
I
this little town
know.
had more murders than you could
I
ever, like,
know.
why would you want to live at Cabot Cove?
I am
So,
cognizant of that fact about Defusky too. Like, I don't want people to think that they're visiting Defusky and their life is in peril. So, I am aware of that. So, I'm not going to
yeah.
have as many people get bumped off on Defusky. So,
Okay. So did you attend writers' workshops? Because you when you talk about the fact that like the murder happens and you're not a witness to that and everything. I mean, how did you learn all that about a cozy mystery? This is how it works. How did you learn all that? Did you attend a writer's workshop to learn that?
I did not. I've always read mysteries from elementary school. I grew up in a very modest household. My dad died when I was 6 years old, and my mom really struggled. And so the school librarian used to always hold the Encyclopedia Brown stories for me, and I've read them. It would be like my thing. I'd go and get the Encyclopedia Brown mysteries when I was a child. I've read mysteries all the way through my life, but I've read procedurals, which are the typical detective as part of the police force kind of mystery. But I've read all of the Agatha Christie stories many, many times. And I always preferred that type of mystery because I liked having people be more observant versus factual, that 1 and 1 equals 2. And so therefore, your blood type matches here and here's your fingerprint. And it just seemed almost not as you didn't, it was almost served to you versus you having to figure it out. And so I preferred the cozy mystery where someone had to figure it out a little bit. Um, so yeah, I knew that was what some of these stories were. And then when I was talking to the publisher who said, if you want to write a story about Defusky, you should write in a genre that you read. And because that's what your subject matter expertise is from your own experience. And so write your book and write your manuscript and we'll see if we'll publish it. And because he and I were just talking several times, and I talked to him about I would pick a cozy mystery, and he was very supportive of that idea. That the setting lends itself to that. Where it's possible you're kind of remote, you're on Bridges Island, not very many people, a lot of swirly things happen. So he was there for that. But when I wrote the manuscript and submitted it first he said, write 10,000 words. And then when I got to 10,000 words, he was like, now I want the whole manuscript and then I'll decide. And so um, he read it and said, I want to publish it and I want it to be a series. So, like, I don't want the characters to die after, at the end of the story. So, what I write about is a lot about building community because that's the aspect of Defusky that I love the most. And it's really a community that solves the crime with everyone contributing in their own way. Even her bookstore is a community based bookstore where we have a room. It's a retail store, but there's a room that people can kind of come in and pick up a donation so that everyone can kind of come to the bookstore and you don't have to spend money to be at the bookstore. And that is very true to Defusky. It's not homogenous. It's not just people who are wealthy, who have, big house that faces the water. It's people there are certainly those people. And then there are people who are just average people. And then there's people who are living in poverty on the island. And so I wanted to have a place that represents all the people of Defusky, not just a certain demographic of the island. Um, so she has her bookshop that is community based. And as we get to know the characters more in the second book, we see those relationships kind of blooming and they become more dependent on each other in certain ways and they are building community. But the hallmark is of both of these books, and I'm working on the third, is that at the end, there's some type of event or circumstance that pulls the community back together to regroup after this crime has occurred, so that it's very healing for the community as well.
So let's talk about that issue of community for a minute. You are doing some interesting things on Defusky to create a sense of community besides writing this book. So talk about what you're doing because I think our audience would be really interested.
So I do two things. One, in addition to doing all the book signings and places that you go to meet readers, um, I do island tours. I lead them. And so several times a year, I offer these tours, sometimes to book groups. They reach out to me. So that's kind of a one-off thing. Sometimes it's just a random group of people who had expressed interest in this, but I've toured over 200 people so far from California, North Carolina, obviously South Carolina as well. I've had people from Massachusetts come to be on these tours where they're about several hours. We go to 6 or 7 different places on the island, depending on what people's interests are. And we begin at, one end of the island and end really most times here on the Melrose Resort where it all began. And I have them stand underneath these trees because that I feel is the most magical place on the island where they get the sense of the history and the people that have been there many, many thousands of years before them and will be there many years after them, being one with what has happened on the island underneath these big, huge oaks and their canopies. And so it's really fun to see people. Some come with a preconceived notion about Defusky because maybe they've heard about it, read about it, been there, gone to the bar that's on the island where you can take your boat and tie up and go there, or they just have heard stuff about the island. So some come with preconceived notions. Some have read the books, some have not. And so it's just a really incredible, like, I love it because I see people's mind open up to this place. They get it. They get what happens on the island. They get why it's important to some people. Not everyone wants to sign up and buy a piece of property. And I'm not selling real estate, so I don't have any skin in the game, but they get it, why this place is, I consider it to be magical. They learn about Pat Conroy. They see some of the places that are beautiful and by traditional standards. They see some of the Gullah houses on the island. They see places that have been deserted. So they see it all and have that perspective of what community means. They'll see the people stop and wave and have a conversation. They'll see people ask you if you need something on the side of the road. They'll have people stop and say, hey, can I have lunch with you? Can I sit here with you? Um, they get it. They get the full experience. And that I feel is such a gift because it's like you can take that and go to what your place is. Maybe it's Stefusky, maybe it's something else, but you get that idea of we're all better with the sum of the parts. So versus just, oh, it's a beautiful beach or it's a beautiful this. It's just it's a really energizing experience. People, like I've had one person take the tour 3 times. She loves it. Um, so I love doing that. I'm doing one upcoming on June 3rd, and there are, it is limited because it's in golf carts. So I already am like almost half full for that one. So, but registration isn't even opened yet. So it's kind of building some momentum of people being interested in us, learning about it. It's all arranged for you. So people maybe want to go to Defusky, but they don't want to get a boat, get a golf cart, figure out, don't know where they're going. So I give people a map. I talk to them through all the sites. And then we have lunch, we have a meal together, which I think is the best part of building community is eating together, and hearing what was important to them. So, and then they head out on their day. So it's I love doing that, and that's something that we do to build community. My books have also been turned into interactive, and interactive and not interactive, into murder mystery dinner theater. So we've had a production company come in and do both books professionally at different places. And then I do an interactive one where I bring it to different bookstores or book club meetings, or I'm going to be at Habersham this Friday night in Beaufort, where I've done it at the Rotten Little Bastard Distillery in Beaufort a couple of times, where the audience becomes the characters and I provide the script, and sometimes they've read the book and so they know what's happening. Sometimes they're totally a different character than what I've written. It's a really just a lot of fun, and it's fun having people interpret what they think is going to happen, and it's just a night of laughs. So but it's another way to build community as well about a similar topic.
Oh, great. That sounds so terrific. And so I just want to say I found out about these things, both that you were doing mystery tours and that you were doing tours of the island by looking at your website. And so
Yes.
your website is beautiful. It's is it lauraelizabeth.com?
No, it's theislandmysteries.com.
The Island Mysteries. I knew it
All
was
one.
something very obvious.
Yeah.
The Island Mystery. So
Yeah.
anybody who's interested in any of those things to entertain our many guests, you can reach out to Laura. So I also wanted to talk about, you were very casual about the fact that you had a publisher who you were talking to, and all the authors that we've met, and this is our 47th webinar. So we've talked to a lot of authors in the last almost 6 years, have talked about how hard it is to get a publisher and how they struggle to get started. But you seem to have a publisher before you written a book. So how did that happen?
So I think that's part of the island magic, actually. But as part of my passion project, I reconnected with this man I went to college with, and he had just written a book. And he was saying, I just think it's incredible that you did this pro bono project, because it was hours and hours and hours time and connections and touring with people and pitches and PowerPoint presentations and all kinds of wacky things that I did to try and get the word out about this
So,
island.
so Laura, let's just stop for a minute. would you explain to people what all that, why you were doing all that stuff related to Melrose?
So the Melrose Resort went bankrupt in 2008, and then somebody else purchased it in 2014 and put a lot of money into the property and was really kind of, coming along. And then he ended up in prison for fraud, federal prison, and his money was really nothing more than a Ponzi scheme. And so for many years, the Melrose Resort sat either in disrepair, as it is today, or and just partially repaired on some things. And the resort itself is a 60 room inn, was closed in 2008 and had not and has not reopened since then. So I got to the point, I did a lot of forensic accounting between then and 2020 to figure out where did the money go, like where is the money and who owns what, because there's all kinds of assets related to the property, including the embarkation on the Defusky side and equestrian center and land in other places on the island and a whole bunch of things. So in my free time, I did a lot of research. So by the time 2020 came, I felt like I knew enough to know not everything, but a lot about what happened and where some of the pitfalls were and what kind of money you'd actually need to invest, which was, nearing $100 million to get the property back. And so I had a business case of a traditional resort with all the amenities that used to be there, or a, kind of holistic wellness center type of resort. And so I found an operator for the holistic wellness type of resort, and an investor for the traditional type of resort. Didn't get them to, speak the same language, but we were 6 weeks out from making an offer when somebody else ended up buying it. And that person actually owns it today, although he hasn't done anything with it in all the years that have passed. So that was, I think, 2022. So I worked on the project for 2 years and felt like just missed it by just a few weeks. But I felt called to do it because there's just so much potential in this property. And
So your
so
friend knew about, your friend
he had
knew
a
about
publisher.
all your work and he had a
Yeah.
publisher.
And he introduced me to this publisher, but his point was he thought I should write a book, a nonfiction book about a passion project. And that really didn't interest me too much because I did one and don't feel that I was the expert. So I just was something I happened to know a lot about. And so it made it a little bit easier, but I don't think I could give people advice about a passion project per se. So that's where the publisher said, well, write something you do know then. But the story of the island should get out, that would be the culmination of your work. So that intrigued me, that idea of writing about all the things that were important to me, and sharing them with other people so that maybe they could find the place that meant that much to them. And because that has been such a gift to me and to my family, to feel rooted someplace that I really haven't before. So I've always been looking towards what's happening next, like where's the next place that we're going to be. So so I think that intrigued me to do. And so I thought, well, he said a cozy mystery is about 50 to 60,000 words. And I thought, well, how hard could that be? Well, it's actually pretty hard. So I'm like, 60,000 words didn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot of words because you write probably 500,000 words that get to be 60,000 words. And things like pacing in a story, revealing a clue in a story, even just character development, it was very important to me that every character sounded differently so that it wasn't just like the same voice. And how do I make sure that their words weren't like just in quotes somebody else's words, so that they were actually words that that character would say versus just random words that anybody could say. So um, it was a lot harder than I'm like, oh, 60,000 words. That doesn't sound too bad. I think I can do that. I was like, this is hard. So, and it gets harder, because you also are marketing the other stories. You're also doing, time is limited. And so you're also doing other things. So definitely this book, the third book, is the slowest to write so far, but it's also the one that I'm enjoying the most. So,
Oh,
because
really?
yeah, I feel like I know the characters now, like they're real to me. So, and they are more authentic in the story as well. Like they're stepping forward in ways that, because their relationships are all a lot stronger now. So I'm having more fun with this one. But I am talking to myself a lot, which is what I do. I don't know if other people do this, but I say the words out loud so that it sounds like, yeah, she would say that, or he would say that.
Oh, you do?
I do. So I write in like either our dining room or our office in our house, and people are like, "What?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm not talking to you. I'm just reading what somebody's saying." So I don't know. It's a lot of fun, and I give it to other people to read to themselves, and then read out loud so that I can hear like my brain is not anticipating what the words are on the page. I'm hearing the words like, yes, this is a conversation. So it sounds authentic, like and real for who these people are in the book. So
I'll give you a great comparison, Laura.
mhm.
David McCullough, who I was with, tells a great story about how he would write all day, and then about 4 o'clock he and his wife would get together, and he would read to her what he'd written, and she would like give him comments and add it back to him, because he said he always believed that it needed to sound right
A
to him.
sound right.
It didn't need just to read right. And so, being having a method of writing that's compared to David McCullough is a good comparison.
Yeah, that's a very nice compliment. It's and that's some of the fun that happens with the scripts is that, for the interactive things, I hear readers say these words out loud, and or even in the professional productions. I mean, it was an incredible experience as a first time author to hear the first book brought to life that way and have actors acting out my words. It was just very, very moving
Yeah.
experience for me, especially since I hadn't expected any of this to happen. It's just believing in something and feeling called to do it and having the opportunity to do it. So,
Yeah.
and I love that.
Well, thank you so much. I think you're going to be hearing from a lot of people based on the fact that we've been able to not only get them interested in writing your book, All Is Now Lost, but contacting you for murder mysteries and for tours. And I mean, this has been great. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye bye.
Bye bye. And Bobby, thank you so much for booking Laura. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much. And I know you want to tell folks a little bit more about what's going on with WAHI. So I'll sign off.
Yeah, I learned a lot from her about the island and the history. And I'll tell you a very silly story. When I first came down here, my mom lived here, and I said we went out to the hotel when it was there, and I said, where did they get the for Defusky name from? So she told me this long story about the first key from Florida. And what do you know? Well, anyway, come to find out, that wasn't the truth. To this day, I don't really know the real name. And I said, well, my students all went home for years knowing the wrong information about history. So I'm still trying to figure out where the word Defusky came from. So we're going to continue on. This is happens to be the next book that she wrote, that Laura Elizabeth wrote. And then I'm gonna check my dates. Uh, May 14th, we're doing the Cheese Biscuit Queen Tells All. And I've seen this woman talk twice, and she's just a hoot. She started by writing recipes. And then what happened was each one had a story behind it. Think about your Thanksgiving with your grandparents or your cousins or what you did. And so this is who will be coming next to tell us a little bit about how she got it going and the stories about her family that went along with it. Then we're going to, and these are some of the ones that authors that I found at the Pat Conroy um, speaker series that I go to in September. This is called Even a Sparrow. And this is what's going to be in on July 9th. And it's based on a true story. The author's parents or relatives from long ago came from Germany and took, no, Sweden. Anyway, sorry, took boats to New York, the hard, strenuous way. But it was very interesting about how they made it across the seas and how they acclimated. They had to stay at some towns more than a day or two due to weather and boats, and how they ended up in New York. And it was a delightful book, and I met her in person too. And Janet read, I did not read the Mud Flat Club Murders by Brian Thiem, and he's a local author. Heard him at the library. Please look at your library. They always do speakers, authors. It's a great place to find a good book, and they will tell you where things are. They have the books, brand new books out. And he was interesting. He was a detective, FBI, just a wonderful background to write his murder mysteries. And the last one is the Book Club for Troublesome Women by Marie Boswick. I'm in the process of reading this one. How just women get together and are in their book group. I almost didn't get her, but she also did one about 3 years ago for us and said she remembers us, loved it, and her agent told her she's not to do that anymore. She's got to concentrate on writing and doing the book. Nevertheless, she wanted to come, and here we have our last author for this year, 2026, 2026, November 12th. So that's what we have up and coming. Please remember to read your pink paper when it comes up. All kinds of things are going on. And join us on March 23rd for the Wellness by the Sea luncheon. And, we have 50 interest groups. If you've met new people, if you know people coming to live here, please let them know about us. We just, and that I do not have that information, but we just gave out wonderful amounts of money to groups that were needed and the scholarships for the high school. So there's a lot of wonderful things happening at WAHHI. So check it out. Even though the summer is coming, we'll ramp it. There's still things to do, but we ramp it back up in the fall.